Mafia boss despised the homeless girl begging outside his club until she took a bullet for him. The city of Ravenport did not sleep. It merely changed its rhythm. By day, it was a grid of gray concrete and rushing commuters, a place of commerce and cold shoulders. By night, however, the city molted, neon signs flickered to life in violent hues of electric blue and crimson, reflecting off the rain-slicked pavement like spilled gasoline. Sirens wailed in the distance, a constant mournful harmony to the heavy bass thumping from the heart of the entertainment district. At the center of this nocturnal kingdom stood Mirage, a nightclub that rose from the street like a black monolith, its entrance guarded by velvet ropes and men with necks as thick as tree trunks. Mirage was more than just a club. It was a statement. It was a temple of excess where liquor flowed like water and secrets were whispered over the rim of crystal glasses. To the public, it was the place to be seen. To those who knew the undercurrents of Ravenport, it was the throne room of Luca Moretti. Aria Cole sat on the sidewalk, just outside the halo of golden light cast by the club's entrance awning. She was a smudge of gray against the pristine black facade of the building. Her oversized hoodie, once a deep navy, had faded to the color of a bruised sky, swallowing her slender frame. At 24 years old, she had the eyes of someone who had lived 3 lifetimes, all of them hard. Her knees were pulled to her chest, shielded by the stiff denim of worn jeans that had seen too many winters. Beside her sat a piece of cardboard, the edges fraying and soft from dampness. The message scrawled in black marker was simple: hungry. Anything helps. A couple stumbled out of a sleek silver sedan at the curb. The woman wore a fur coat that likely cost more than Aria had earned in her entire life. The man adjusted a silk tie, laughing at something she whispered. "Spare change," Aria said, her voice raspy from the cold. "Just enough for a coffee." The man did not even look down. He stepped around her as if she were a puddle of dirty water, shielding his polished shoes from contamination. The woman offered a fleeting, disgusted glance, her nose wrinkling before she turned away, clutching her purse tighter against her side. Aria did not flinch. She was used to being a ghost, in the foster system. She had been a file number. On the streets, she was an obstacle. It was better to be ignored than to be noticed by the wrong people. She pulled her hood lower, tucking her hands into her sleeves to preserve warmth. "Get a job," a passing teenager jeered, kicking a stray soda can in her direction. Aria stared at the pavement. If getting a job was as easy as wishing for one, she would be running a Fortune 500 company by now. But without an address, a phone, or clean clothes, the doors of Ravenport remained firmly locked. A low rumble vibrated through the concrete beneath her. It was a sound deeper and more authoritative than the usual traffic. A procession of black SUVs rolled down the street, moving with the precision of a funeral motorcade. The lead vehicle, a massive armored beast with tinted windows, glided to a halt directly in front of the velvet ropes. The air shifted. Even the bouncers straightened their spines. The driver's door opened, and a large man stepped out, scanning the street before opening the rear passenger door. A polished black dress shoe hit the asphalt, followed by the sharp, tailored line of a charcoal suit. Luca Moretti stepped out into the night. He was a man carved from marble and ice. His dark hair was swept back, severe and immaculate. His face was a map of sharp angles, from a jawline that could cut glass to eyes that were dark, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth. He adjusted his cuffs, his gaze sweeping over his domain. He owned the street. He owned the club, in many ways. He owned the night itself. His eyes stopped when they landed on Aria. It was not a look of pity. It was the look a sculptor might give a crack in the stone, an imperfection that ruined the aesthetic. He frowned, a subtle tightening of his brow that terrified grown men. "Rocco," Luca said, his voice a smooth baritone that carried over the street noise without effort. The head of security, a giant named Rocco, hurried over. "Yes, boss. Why is there a beggar sitting 5 feet from my entrance?" Luca asked. He did not point. He simply stared at her. "I chased her off earlier," Rocco said, looking nervous. She keeps coming back, like a stray cat. Move her, Luca commanded, farther down the street. I do not want to see filth when I walk out of my own front door. Rocco nodded sharply and turned toward Arya. He marched over, his shadow falling over her like a collapsing building. You heard the man, Rocco grunted. Time to move. Beat it. Arya looked up. She was tired. Her bones ached from the damp cold, and she had not eaten a full meal in 2 days. Something inside her, a spark that usually remained dormant for survival, flared to life. She looked past Rocco, locking eyes with the man in the suit. It is a public sidewalk, Arya said. Her voice was steady, surprising even herself. Rocco reached down, grabbing the edge of her cardboard sign. Do not make me drag you. Girl, move. Arya snatched the sign back. I am not blocking the door. I am 10 feet away. I have a right to be here. Luca, who had been turning toward the club entrance, paused. He turned back, his interest piqued by the audacity of the refusal. He walked over, his movements fluid and predatory. The crowd of clubgoers parted instantly, sensing the dangerous aura radiating from him. He stopped 3 feet from her. Up close, he smelled of expensive cologne, tobacco, and cold rain. You have a right, Luca repeated, the words rolling off his tongue with mocking amusement. You think you have rights in this city because you occupy space. I have a right to exist, Arya said, lifting her chin. She refused to cower, even though every instinct screamed that this man was a predator. You are bad for business, Luca said coldly. My clients pay a premium to escape the ugly realities of the world. They do not come here to step over the wreckage of society. Arya let out a short, dry laugh. It was a brittle sound. Your business is bad for everyone else, she snapped. You sell poison and call it a party. Do not pretend you are a saint just because your suit costs more than my life. Silence descended on the immediate area. Rocco looked as though he might have a stroke. No one spoke to Luca Moretti that way. Not if they wanted to keep their teeth. Luca stared at her. For a moment, the mask of indifference slipped, revealing a flash of genuine irritation mixed with calculation. He looked at her tattered sneakers, her dirty hands, and finally, her defiant brown eyes. If you're still here when I come out, Luca said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, you will regret it. He turned on his heel and walked into the club, the heavy doors swallowing him whole. Rocco gave Arya one last warning glare before returning to his post. Arya let out a breath she did not know she had been holding, her hands trembling slightly, not from cold, but from adrenaline. She pulled her knees tighter. She would not move, not yet. Inside Mirage, the world was a sensory overload. The bass was a physical force, vibrating through the floorboards. Scantily clad dancers moved in cages suspended from the ceiling, and the air was thick with the scent of perfume and sweat. Luca moved through the crowd like a shark through a reef, ignoring the hands that reached out to brush his arm, the voices calling his name. He took the private elevator up to the VIP level, a glass-walled sanctuary that overlooked the chaos of the dance floor. The sound here was dampened, a muffled throb rather than a roar. 3 men were waiting for him at a low mahogany table. Dante, his right hand and oldest friend, sat with a calm alertness, cleaning his glasses. Marco, younger and hungrier, tapped his foot restlessly against the floor. Vico, an older man with a scar running through his eyebrow, nursed a scotch. You are late, Dante said, sliding his glasses back onto his face. I got held up by the scenery, Luca muttered, sinking into the leather armchair at the head of the table. A waitress immediately appeared, placing a glass of amber liquid before him and vanishing just as quickly. What is the situation with the shipments? Luca asked, dispensing with pleasantries. Marco leaned forward, eager to impress. The northern route is secure. We moved 3 units through the harbor last night without a hitch. The customs officials have been compensated. And Hale? Luca asked, swirling the liquor in his glass. Vico grunted. Victor Hale is getting bold. Luca, 2 of our runners were jumped on 5th Street yesterday. They were beaten, not killed, but the message was clear. Hale thinks he can push into the downtown district. Luca took a slow sip of his drink. his expression unreadable. Victor is a dog chasing a car. He does not know what to do if he actually catches it. He is recruiting, Dante warned quietly. He is pulling in muscle from out of town. He's not just looking for territory. Luca, he's looking for a war. Let him look, Luca said, setting his glass down with a sharp clack. We do not react to provocations. We expand. We take the South Side warehouses next week as planned. If Hale sends his boys, we bury them. But I will not let a second-rate thug dictate my schedule. Marco grinned. That is what I told Vico. We are untouchable. No one is untouchable, Luca said, his eyes narrowing. That is the first mistake of a dead man. We are careful. We are precise. And we are ruthless when we need to be. He glanced down through the glass floor, watching the writhing mass of bodies dancing below. His mind, however, drifted momentarily to the sidewalk outside, the girl's eyes, the way she had looked at him with such utter disdain. It annoyed him. He was used to fear, respect, or lust. He was not used to judgment from someone who owned nothing. Outside, the temperature had dropped. A fine mist began to fall, turning the neon lights into hazy halos. Arya shivered, the dampness seeping through her layers, her stomach cramped with hunger, a sharp, twisting pain. She checked the small plastic cup she used for donations, 3 quarters and a dime, not enough for a sandwich. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver bracelet. It was a cheap thing, a child's trinket with a small star charm. It was the only thing she had left from her life before the foster homes, before the system chewed her up and spat her out. It had belonged to her mother, or maybe her grandmother. The memory was fuzzy. A food truck had parked down the block, the smell of grilling onions and grease drifting on the wind. It was torture. Arya stood up, her legs stiff. She walked over to the truck. The vendor, a heavy-set man with a kind face, looked at her as she approached. I do not have any money, Arya said quietly, placing the bracelet on the metal counter. But this is silver, real silver. Will you take it for a grilled cheese? The man looked at the bracelet, then at Arya's hollow cheeks. He sighed and pushed the bracelet back toward her. Keep your jewelry, kid. He grunted. Arya's shoulders slumped. Please, I am... He turned around and scraped the grill, wrapping a hot sandwich in foil. He slapped it onto the counter. I said keep it. Take the sandwich, and get out of here before my boss sees me giving away inventory. Arya grabbed the sandwich, the warmth of it searing her frozen fingertips. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. She hurried back to her spot, sitting down and unwrapping the foil with trembling hands. As she ate, she thought of Toby, her little brother. He would be 12 now. They had been separated 6 years ago when she aged out of the system, and he was sent to a family in another state. She had promised to come back for him. She had promised to get a job, get an apartment, and come get him. She had failed. I will not die here, she whispered to herself, wiping a crumb from her lip. I will not disappear on this pavement. The night wore on. The crowd at Mirage grew rowdier as the alcohol took hold. Around 1 a.m, a group of men stumbled out, loud and boisterous. One of them, a man in a rumpled suit with a loosened tie, spotted Arya. He swayed on his feet, his eyes glassy and mean. Look at this, he slurred to his friends. A little rat. He stumbled toward her. Hey, sweetie, you got a terminal nearby, or are you just waiting for the trash truck? Arya stared straight ahead, ignoring him. It was the safest tactic. Do not engage. The man did not like being ignored. He reached down and kicked her cardboard sign, sending it skittering into the gutter. I am talking to you, he shouted. You are bringing down the property value. Why do you not go find a sewer? Please leave me alone, Arya said, her voice tight. The man laughed and lunged forward. Grabbing the hood of her sweatshirt, he yanked her upward. Let us see what is under those rags. Maybe you can pay for your space on the sidewalk. Huh. Panic flared in Arya's chest. Hot and white, she did not freeze. She reacted. She shoved her palms hard against the man's chest, using his own drunken momentum against him. Get off me, she yelled. The man stumbled back, tripping over his own feet and landing hard on his backside. His friends roared with laughter, pointing at him. "You got dropped by a girl, Mike," one of them shouted. The man on the ground turned red with humiliation and rage. He scrambled to get up, fists clenching, but Rocco stepped out from the shadows of the entrance. "That is enough," Rocco rumbled, crossing his massive arms. "Go home, folks. Party is over." The drunk man looked at Rocco, then at Aria, spitting on the ground near her feet before retreating with his friends, muttering curses. Aria stood with her back against the brick wall, her chest heaving. She pulled her hood up again, trying to hide the shaking in her hands, high above, on the private balcony of the VIP level. A cherry-red ember glowed in the darkness. Luca stood by the railing, a cigarette between his fingers. He had watched the entire exchange. He had seen the fear in her posture, but he had also seen the way she shoved the man. She had not screamed for help. She had not curled into a ball. She had fought back. Interesting. Luca murmured to the empty air. The smoke curled from his lips, disappearing into the night. Most people in her position broke. They became hollow shells. But that girl, she had fire in her. It was a useless fire, one that would likely get her killed on these streets. But it was there nonetheless. He finished his cigarette and crushed it out on the railing before turning back to the warmth of the club. At 2 a.m, the club began to empty. The music faded, and the lights inside brightened. The staff began the cleanup. Luca emerged from the front doors, flanked by Dante and Marco. The rain had stopped, but the air remained thick with moisture. He adjusted his jacket, signaling for his driver. The black SUV idled at the curb. He looked to his left. She was still there. Aria was sitting on her cardboard, which she had retrieved from the gutter. It was wet and bent, but she had smoothed it out. She looked up as Luca approached. "You are stubborn," Luca said, stopping in front of her. "I told you to leave." "And I told you I have rights," Aria replied. Though her voice was weary, she looked exhausted, her earlier fire dimmed by the creeping cold of the early morning. Luca looked down at her. From this angle, she looked incredibly small. "Why do you fight battles you cannot win?" he asked. "It is a waste of energy." Aria wrapped her arms around her shins. "Because if I stop fighting, I become invisible. And if I become invisible, I disappear." Luca stared at her. For a second, the mask slipped again. He knew what it was like to fight to be seen. He knew what it was like to claw your way out of the dirt, desperate to prove that you mattered. He had built an empire on that very desperation. "People like you," Aria muttered, looking away from him to stare at the wet street. "You never look down. Not unless something is bleeding." Luca paused. His hand hovered near his pocket, an instinctive urge to pull out a bill, to pay her off, to make the discomfort of her existence go away. But her words stopped him. He looked at her closely. He saw the sharp line of her jaw, the grime on her cheek, the fierce, tired intelligence in her eyes. For a second, their gazes locked. His eyes were hard, guarded, the eyes of a king. Hers were the eyes of a survivor, weary but unbroken. "You know nothing about people like me," Luca said quietly. He turned away, breaking the connection. He stepped toward the open door of his SUV, the leather interior promising warmth and safety. He pretended not to care. He pretended she was just another piece of the city's debris. "Get in the car." "Dante," Luca said sharply. As he placed one foot inside the vehicle, the sound of tires rolling slowly over wet pavement caught his ear. It was distinct, slower than the passing traffic. A dark sedan with tinted windows was cruising down the street, its headlights off. It moved like a shark in dark water, silent and purposeful. It was parallel to the club, slowing down even further as it approached the entrance where Luca stood. Luca froze, his hand gripping the door frame of his SUV. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The air suddenly felt heavy, charged with a static tension that had nothing to do with the coming storm. Unseen eyes watched from behind the dark glass of the sedan. "Luca," Dante said urgently, noticing the car. "Get in, now." Luca did not move immediately. He glanced at the sedan, then flicked his eyes back to the girl sitting on the sidewalk. completely exposed. The sedan rolled past, the window cracking open just an inch before the car accelerated, disappearing around the corner into the darkness of Ravenport. No shots were fired. Not yet. But the message was delivered. The violence was coming. Luca slid into his car, the heavy door slamming shut with a sound like a vault closing, sealing him in and leaving Arya alone in the cold. The wind that night in Ravenport was sharper than a blade. It whipped down the alleyways and scoured the open streets, carrying the biting dampness of the harbor. Arya Cole pulled her knees up to her chin, trying to make herself as small as possible against the brick facade of the Mirage nightclub. A dry, hacking cough rattled in her chest, shaking her thin frame. She tightened her arms around her legs, waiting for the spasm to pass, her breath misting in the freezing air. Most people would have found a shelter or a subway grate on a night like this, but the shelters were full, dangerous, or both, and the subway cops were cracking down on loiterers. Besides, Arya was stubborn. This spot, despite the cold, was well lit. It was monitored by cameras, in a twisted way. It was the safest place she knew. She had returned. After the threat from the boss the night before, after the fear that had coursed through her veins, she had come back. It was not bravery, it was necessity. And perhaps a small, foolish part of her refused to let a man in a tailored suit dictate where she could exist. Headlights swept across the pavement, blindingly bright. The familiar procession of black SUVs rolled to the curb. Arya stiffened, pressing her back harder against the wall. Luca Moretti stepped out of the lead vehicle. He looked impeccable, untouched by the elements, his long wool coat buttoned against the chill. He did not head straight for the door this time. He stopped on the sidewalk, his dark eyes scanning the area until they landed on her. He walked over, his stride purposeful. The irritation on his face was palpable. But beneath it, there was something else, a flicker of disbelief. He looked at her like she was a mathematical equation that refused to balance. "You are still here," Luca said. It was not a question. It was an accusation. Arya looked up, fighting the urge to cough again. "I told you, it is a public sidewalk." Luca stared down at her. The wind ruffled his dark hair, but he seemed not to notice. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a thick money clip. He peeled off a wad of cash, $100 bills that fluttered slightly in the breeze. It was more money than Arya had seen in 5 years. It was enough for a month at a motel. Maybe 2. "Here," Luca said, extending the cash toward her. Arya stared at the money, her stomach twisted. It would be so easy to take it, to buy hot food, to sleep in a bed with clean sheets. "Take it," Luca commanded, his voice impatient. "Take it and go. Find somewhere else to be. Anywhere else. I do not want you near my club." Arya looked from the money to his face. His expression was cold, transactional. He was paying for a service, and the service was her disappearance. He wanted to erase the stain on his scenery. "No," Arya said. Luca's hand paused in midair. "Excuse me, I said no," Arya replied, her voice steady despite the cold. Luca let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Do not be stupid. This is more than you make in a year of begging." "I am not begging right now," Arya said, pushing herself up to a standing position. Her legs were stiff, but she stood tall. "I am sitting, and I will not be bought off the sidewalk. You are refusing help," Luca said, his eyes narrowing. "That is not pride. That is idiocy. That is not help," Arya snapped. "That is a bribe to make me invisible. If you wanted to help, you would look at me like a person, not a pile of trash you want hauled away. I will take help when it is not meant to erase my existence." She sat back down, crossing her arms over her chest, signaling the conversation was over. Luca stood there for a long moment, the cash still held out in the freezing air. He was unsettled. He dealt with politicians, rival gang leaders, and corrupt cops. Everyone had a price. Everyone had a lever that could be pulled. But this girl, shivering in rags with nothing to her name but her breath, had just told him no. He shoved the money back into his pocket, his jaw tightening. "Freeze out here then," he muttered. "See if I care." He turned and marched toward the club entrance, signaling his men to follow. But as he passed Rocco at the door, he paused, glancing back one last time at the small figure huddled in the shadows. He shook his head and disappeared inside. The warmth of the club was suffocating after the biting cold outside. Luca shed his coat, handing it to a cloakroom attendant, and made his way immediately to the back office. The bass of the music was already thumping through the floor, a heartbeat that never stopped, inside the office. The atmosphere was thick with cigar smoke and tension. Dante and Marco were already there, leaning over a map of the city spread out on Luca's mahogany desk. Vico stood by the window, peering out through the blinds. "What is the news?" Luca asked. "Bypassing pleasantries? It is Victor," Dante said, his face grim. "He hit one of our collection points in the East End an hour ago. He knew exactly when the drop was happening, to the minute." Luca walked around the desk, his hands gripping the back of his leather chair. That schedule was only finalized this morning. "Exactly," Marco said, pacing the room. "He's moving too fast. Luca, he's predicting our moves before we make them." "He's not predicting them," Luca said, his voice low and dangerous. "He is being told." Silence descended on the room. The word hung in the air. Traitor, in their world. It was the dirtiest word in the language. It meant rot from the inside. "Who knew the schedule?" Luca asked. "Just us," Dante said quietly. "The four of us in this room, and the captains." Luca looked at his lieutenants. He had known these men for years. He had bled with them. The idea that one of them, or one of their trusted captains, was feeding information to Victor Hale was a poison that made his blood boil. "Find the leak," Luca ordered. "Turn over every stone. Check phone records. Check bank accounts. If someone is talking to Hale, I want them found, and I want them brought to me alive." Marco nodded, looking agitated. "We should hit back. Strike Hale's warehouse tonight. Show him we are not weak." "No," Luca said firmly. "If there is a leak, Hale will be expecting a retaliation. We do not walk into traps. We wait. We secure our own house first." He dismissed them with a wave of his hand, needing a moment of silence. As they filed out, Luca sat in his chair, staring at the closed door. He felt a headache forming behind his eyes. His empire was under siege, and yet his mind kept drifting back to the girl on the sidewalk. Her refusal to take the money played on a loop in his mind. It was baffling. It was annoying. It was admirable. Outside, the night dragged on. The cold had settled deep into Aria's bones, making her joints ache. She rubbed her arms, trying to generate friction. Around midnight, the side door of the club opened. A young bartender named Leo stepped out, holding a plastic container. He looked around nervously before spotting Aria. "Hey," Leo whispered, hurrying over. He crouched down and placed the container in her hands. It was warm. "Kitchen made too many fries," Leo said with a wink. "Do not tell the boss." Aria opened the lid. The steam hit her face, smelling of salt and grease. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever smelled. "Thank you, Leo. Seriously, eat up," Leo said, standing back up. "It is brutal out here tonight." He slipped back inside. A few minutes later, Rocco, the giant head of security, did his rounds. He stopped in front of Aria, looking her up and down. "Still alive." Rocco grunted. "Still here," Aria replied, popping a fry into her mouth. Rocco actually cracked a smile. It was a terrifying expression on his scarred face, but it was genuine. "You are like a mascot kid, the unofficial mascot of Mirage. Maybe we should get you a uniform." Aria laughed. It was a rusty sound, unused, but it lightened the air around her. "Only if it comes with dental benefits." Rocco chuckled and shook his head. "Do not push your luck." He moved on, resuming his stoic watch. For a brief moment, Aria felt a flicker of warmth that had nothing to do with the fries. It was the feeling of being seen. Just for a second, not as a nuisance, but as a person. She ate the food slowly, savoring every bite, knowing it might be the only fuel she got for another 24 hours. The club began to close down around 3 in the morning. The streets were quiet, the traffic having died down to the occasional taxi. The heavy front doors swung open, and Luca emerged. He was flanked by Dante and Marco, their expressions tight and serious. They were discussing something in low tones, likely business, likely violence. Luca stopped as the cold air hit him. He buttoned his suit jacket, but it was little protection against the wind that had picked up significantly. His eyes automatically went to the spot on the sidewalk. Arya was shivering violently now. The fries had provided temporary warmth, but the temperature had dropped below freezing. She was curled into a tight ball, her head tucked into her knees, shaking so hard her teeth were chattering audibly. Luca watched her for a moment. He should get in his car. He should go home to his heated penthouse and forget about the stubborn girl who refused his money. But his feet did not move. "Wait here," Luca told his men. He walked over to Arya. She sensed his presence and looked up, her eyes watery and red-rimmed. She did not have the energy to snap at him this time. "You look like death," Luca said bluntly. Arya tried to speak, but her teeth clacked together. "I am fine." "You are a terrible liar," Luca said. He reached up and unraveled the scarf from around his neck. It was charcoal gray, made of pure cashmere, soft as butter and worth more than everything Arya owned combined. He held it out to her. "Here." Arya stared at the scarf, then at him. "What is this?" She managed to chatter. "It is a scarf," Luca said, his voice gruff. "Put it on. I do not want your—" "Put it on, or I will throw it in the gutter," Luca interrupted. "Use it or sell it. I do not care. Just stop shaking. It is distracting." Arya hesitated, then reached out with trembling fingers and took it. The material was still warm from his body. She wrapped it around her neck, burying her nose in the soft fabric. It smelled of him, tobacco and expensive wood. The warmth was instant, a small mercy in the freezing night. She looked up at him, a spark of her old defiance returning. "You are worried about me. Moretti, do not flatter yourself," Luca scoffed, though his eyes lingered on her face. "I just do not want a frozen body on my doorstep in the morning. It is bad for business." He turned to walk away, his back to the street. Arya watched him go, her hand clutching the ends of the scarf. "Thank you," she whispered, the sarcasm gone. Luca was 10 feet away, nearing his waiting SUV where Dante was holding the door open. Marco was standing by the rear bumper, checking his phone. Then, the world exploded. It started with a screech of tires, a high-pitched, tearing sound that shattered the quiet. A dark sedan, the same one from the night before, drifted around the corner at high speed, its engine roaring. Luca stopped and turned, his instincts flaring. "Gun!" Dante screamed, diving behind the SUV door. The rear windows of the speeding sedan rolled down. Automatic weapon fire erupted, a stuttering, deafening roar. Bullets chewed up the pavement, sparking against the asphalt and shattering the glass facade of the club. "Get down," Luca shouted, shoving Marco toward the cover of the car. Luca was exposed. He was standing in the open space between the club entrance and his vehicle. He reached for the gun in his shoulder holster, but he was too slow. The car was parallel to him now. From her vantage point on the ground, Arya saw it. She saw the muzzle flash from the back window of the car. She saw the shooter, a faceless shadow, adjusting his aim. He was not spraying bullets anymore. He was aiming directly at the center of Luca's back. Luca was looking at the car, but he was moving to push Marco further into cover. He did not see the barrel tracking him. Arya did not think. There was no decision-making process, no weighing of pros and cons. There was only the terrifying certainty that the man in the suit was about to die. She launched herself forward, her sneakers scraped against the concrete as she sprinted the few yards between them. "Luca!" She screamed. She slammed into him from behind. It was not a graceful tackle. It was a desperate collision of bodies. She shoved him hard, throwing her entire weight against his spine. Luca stumbled forward, knocked off balance by the unexpected impact. He crashed onto the hood of his SUV just as the air where he had been standing was ripped apart. Arya felt a sensation like a hot branding iron being driven into her shoulder. The force of the bullet spun her around. She did not hear the shot that hit her. She only felt the impact, a massive, sickening thud that stole the breath from her lungs. She collapsed onto the pavement, the world tilting sideways. The sedan peeled away, tires smoking, disappearing into the night as Dante and the other security guards returned fire. their shots echoing uselessly against the fleeing taillights. Luca scrambled off the hood of the car, his gun drawn, his chest heaving. He scanned the street, adrenaline flooding his system. "Are we clear?" he shouted. "Clear," Dante yelled, scanning the darkness. "They are gone." Luca turned to look at the girl. He expected to see her cowering on the ground, terrified by the noise. Instead, he saw red. Aria was lying on her back, her face pale as moonlight. The expensive cashmere scarf he had given her just moments ago was no longer gray. It was soaking up a rapidly spreading stain of crimson. "Aria," Luca breathed, the name falling from his lips in a whisper of horror. He holstered his weapon and dropped to his knees beside her. The arrogance, the cold detachment, the carefully constructed armor of the mafia boss, it all vanished. She was blinking slowly, staring up at the neon sign of the Mirage that buzzed overhead. Her hand was pressed to her left shoulder, blood seeping through her fingers. Luca pressed his hands over hers, applying pressure. The blood was hot, shockingly hot against the freezing air. "Look at me," Luca commanded, his voice raw. "Aria, look at me." Her eyes drifted to his face. She looked confused, as if she could not quite understand why she was on the ground. "That hurts," she wheezed. "I know," Luca said, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "I know it hurts. You took a bullet. Why did you do that, you stupid girl? Why did you do that?" Aria let out a weak, breathy laugh that turned into a grimace of pain. "I guess. I finally got your attention." Luca felt a knot of emotion tighten in his throat, so painful it was hard to speak. He pressed harder on the wound, trying to stem the flow. "Dante," he roared, not looking away from Aria's face. "Get the car. Now. We're going to the clinic. We should wait for an ambulance," Marco suggested, stepping closer, looking pale. "No ambulance," Luca snarled, his eyes blazing with a fury that made Marco take a step back. "No police. We handle this. Bring the car around. Move." Dante scrambled into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life. Luca looked back down at Aria. Her eyelids were fluttering. The shock was setting in. "Stay awake," Luca said, leaning close to her ear. "Do not you dare close your eyes. You hear me. You fight this. I am—" "Tired," Aria whispered. "I do not care," Luca said, his voice cracking. "You do not get to die. Not for me. You stay here." He scooped her up into his arms. She felt incredibly light, frail as a bird. He held her tight against his chest, heedless of the blood staining his custom suit. As he carried her toward the open door of the SUV, a cold, dark rage settled over him. It was a promise, silent and deadly. Whoever had done this, whoever had fired that shot and made this girl bleed, was going to suffer. They were going to beg for death before he was finished with them. He slid into the back seat, cradling Aria against him. "Drive," he ordered. The car tore away from the curb, speeding into the night, leaving only a pool of blood and a few spent shell casings on the sidewalk where Aria Cole had once fought to exist. The tires of the SUV shrieked against the asphalt as Dante drifted the heavy vehicle into the rear alley of the St. Jude Medical Center. It was a private facility, discreet and expensive, funded almost entirely by the Moretti Family Trust. It was the place where questions were never asked, and police reports were never filed unless Luca Moretti gave the order. Luca kicked the door open before the car had fully stopped. He slid out, pulling Aria's limp body with him. She was terrifyingly still. The blood had soaked through the cashmere scarf in his shirt, turning the fabric slick and warm. "Help!" Luca roared, his voice echoing off the brick walls of the loading dock. "I need a stretcher. Now." The back doors of the clinic flew open. Dr. Evans, a gray-haired man who had stitched up Luca's father 30 years ago, rushed out with 2 nurses. They wasted no time. There were no forms to sign, no insurance cards to scan. They saw who was holding the girl, and they moved with military precision. They transferred Aria onto the gurney. Her head lolled to the side, her face ashen. Gunshot wound to the left shoulder. Luca barked, running alongside the stretcher as they pushed through the double doors. "She lost consciousness 2 minutes ago. Vital signs are weak." One of the nurses called out, "BP is dropping. Doctor." Evans looked at Luca, stopping him at the threshold of the surgical suite. "You stop here. Luca, you know the rules. You are not sterile, and you are vibrating with adrenaline. Let me work. She does not die." "Evans," Luca said, gripping the doctor's forearm. His hand was stained crimson. "Do you understand me? She does not die. I will do my best," Evans said calmly, peeling Luca's fingers off his arm. "Go clean yourself up." The doors swung shut, cutting off the view of Aria's pale face. The red light above the door flickered on. Surgery in progress. Luca stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed doors. His chest heaved. The smell of copper and iron filled his nose. He looked down at his hands. They were covered in the blood of a girl whose name he had only learned 48 hours ago. He turned and paced the length of the hallway. It was a sterile, white corridor that smelled of bleach and antiseptic. It was a smell he hated. It reminded him of endings. Dante appeared at the end of the hall, looking shaken. "I sent the boys to secure the perimeter. No one gets in or out without a badge and a pat-down." Luca did not answer. He just kept pacing. 10 steps one way. Turn. 10 steps back. "Why did she do it?" Luca muttered, more to himself than to Dante. "She has nothing. She's nobody. Why throw herself in front of a bullet for me?" Dante leaned against the wall, cleaning his glasses nervously. "Maybe she is crazy, boss. Or maybe she just has a death wish." Luca stopped and glared at him. "A death wish does not make you jump in front of a gun. A death wish makes you pull the trigger yourself. This was instinct." He sat down heavily in a plastic chair, putting his head in his hands. The waiting began. It was a torture he was not accustomed to. Luca was a man of action. He solved problems with money, violence, or negotiation. He could not negotiate with a bullet wound. He could not bribe death. 3 hours passed. The red light finally turned off. "Doctor." Evans emerged, pulling off his surgical cap. He looked tired. "She is stable," Evans said. Luca let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his lungs for a lifetime. He stood up, and the arm. The bullet shattered the clavicle and tore through the deltoid muscle. Evans explained, "It missed the lung and the artery by a fraction of an inch. She is lucky. I had to reconstruct the bone and stitch the muscle. She will have a scar, and she will need physical therapy, but she will keep the arm." "Can I see her?" Luca asked. "She's in recovery." Evans said, "She's groggy from the anesthesia. Do not upset her." Luca nodded and walked past the doctor. He entered the recovery room quietly. It was dimly lit. The only sound, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Aria lay in the center of the bed, looking small against the white sheets. Her left arm was immobilized in a sling and bandages. An IV line ran into the back of her right hand. Her face was scrubbed clean of the street grime, revealing pale skin and a dusting of freckles across her nose that he had never noticed before. Luca dragged a chair to the bedside. He took off his ruined jacket and tossed it in the corner. He rolled up the sleeves of his blood-stained dress shirt, exposing his forearms. He sat down and watched her breathe. One inhale, one exhale. He needed to see the rhythm to believe she was still there. It was another hour before she stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, heavy and reluctant. She let out a small groan, her brow furrowing. "Water?" she whispered, her voice like sandpaper. Luca immediately poured a cup from the pitcher on the bedside table. He held the straw to her lips, drank slowly. Aria took a few sips, then pulled back, blinking her eyes open. She focused on the ceiling, then the IV bag, and finally, she turned her head to look at him. For a moment, she looked confused. Then the memory flooded back. Her eyes widened. "You," she rasped. "Me," Luca said softly. Where am I?" she asked, trying to sit up. She gasped as pain shot through her shoulder. Luca was on his feet instantly, his hand hovering near her uninjured shoulder to steady her. "Do not move," he ordered gently. "You're at a private clinic. You had surgery." "Surgery," Aria repeated, looking down at the bandages. "I got shot." "Yes," Luca said, sitting back down. "You got shot." He looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers. The question that had been burning a hole in his mind finally came out. "Why?" Luca asked. His voice was low, demanding. Arya closed her eyes for a moment, fighting the nausea. "Why what? Why did you do it?" Lucas said. "You barely know me. You hate me. You threw yourself in front of a weapon to save my life. Why?" Arya looked at the ceiling again. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick. "Because," she whispered. "That is not an answer," Lucas said. Arya turned her head to look at him again. Her gaze was clear. Despite the drugs, there was a haunted look in her eyes, a shadow of something old and terrible. "I used to have a friend," she said quietly, "on the streets. His name was Benny. He was older. He looked out for me when I first ran away." Lucas stayed silent, listening. 2 years ago, some guys, some dealers. They thought he stole from them. Arya continued, her voice trembling slightly. "They beat him to death in an alley. I was hiding behind a dumpster. I watched the whole thing. I could not do anything. I just watched him die." She took a shaky breath. "When I saw that gun pointing at you, I just moved. I did not think. I just knew I did not want to watch somebody get murdered right in front of me again." The admission hung in the air. It was not about loyalty to him. It was not about heroism. It was about trauma. She had saved him to save herself from another nightmare. Luca looked at her, feeling a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. He leaned back in his chair. "You are an idiot," he said, but the bite was gone from his tone. "You almost died." "But I did not," Arya said, managing a weak smirk. "And neither did you. So you are welcome." Luca shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "You cannot go back there." "Arya, what?" she asked. "The street," Luca said firmly. "You are done. You cannot go back to your sidewalk." Arya bristled, trying to push herself up again despite the pain. "Excuse me. You do not get to tell me where I go." "Yes, I do," Luca said, his voice hardening. "That shooting was not random. It was a hit. And now you are a witness. You saw the car. You saw the shooter. And more importantly, everyone saw you take a bullet for Luca Moretti." "So?" Arya asked. "So that makes you a target," Luca explained, leaning forward. "My enemies will think you matter to me. They will think you are leverage. If you go back to that sidewalk, you will be dead in 24 hours. Arya paled. She had not thought of that. She had just wanted to stop the bleeding. "I have nowhere else to go," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "I know," Luca said. "That is why you are coming with me." "I am not staying with you," Arya said quickly. "Not with me," Luca corrected. "I have a secure apartment in the city. It is used for associates who need to lay low. You will stay there until you are healed and until I deal with the people who did this." Arya looked at him with suspicion. "A cage is still a cage. Moretti, even if it has a nice view. It is not a cage," Luca said. "It is a fortress, and right now, it is the only thing standing between you and a shallow grave. It is a business necessity. Arya, I do not leave loose ends, and I do not let people who save my life get slaughtered in the gutter." Arya looked at the IV in her hand. She thought of the cold wind, the hard concrete, and the faceless men in the car. She hated being controlled. She hated owing anyone anything. But she also knew he was right. "Fine," she whispered, "but only until I can use my arm again." "Agreed," Luca said. 2 days later, Arya was discharged. Luca drove her himself, flanked by a security detail. The apartment was located in a high-rise building in the financial district, a place of steel and glass that touched the clouds. Luca walked her in. The apartment was expansive. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, hardwood floors, and furniture that looked like it had never been sat on. It was beautiful, cold, and utterly terrifying. "Here is the key," Luca said, placing a sleek electronic fob on the marble kitchen island. "The pantry is stocked. The fridge is full. There are clean clothes in the bedroom closet. My men are stationed in the lobby and the hallway. No one gets in unless you open this door." Arya stood in the middle of the living room, clutching her injured arm against her chest. She felt dirty in the pristine space. Her worn sneakers squeaked on the polished floor. "Thank you," she mumbled. Looking at her feet, Luca lingered by the door. "Get some rest. I will check on you tomorrow." when the door clicked shut, engaging the heavy electronic lock. Arya let out a sob she had been holding back for days. She walked to the bedroom. The bed was massive, covered in a white duvet that looked like a cloud. She walked into the bathroom. It was larger than the entire room she had shared with 4 other girls in her last foster home. She turned on the tap, and hot water poured out instantly. She stripped off the hospital scrubs Luca's people had provided and stepped into the shower. The hot water hit her skin, stinging the scrapes and bruises, but it felt like heaven. She washed her hair 3 times, watching the gray water swirl down the drain. When she got out, she opened the closet. It was filled with clothes, jeans, sweaters, t-shirts, sweatpants. They were all her size. They were all new. She ran her hand over a soft cotton sweater. She should be grateful. Instead, she felt a flare of resentment. He had bought her life. He had dressed her like a doll. It was charity, and it tasted like ash in her mouth. But when she pulled on the clean sweatpants and the oversized t-shirt, the comfort was undeniable. She climbed into the massive bed, sinking into the mattress. For the first time in years, she slept without one ear open for danger. A few days passed in a blur of solitude. Arya paced the apartment, stared out the window, and ate food she had not had to beg for. She felt like an imposter in someone else's life. On the 3rd evening, the buzzer rang. It was Luca. He entered carrying a paper bag. He looked tired. The circles under his eyes were darker, and there was a tension in his jaw that had not been there before. "I brought coffee," he said, setting 2 cups on the table. Real coffee, not the sludge from the machine. Arya was sitting at the kitchen table, wearing one of the loose t-shirts he had provided. Her sling was awkward, digging into her neck. "Thanks," she said. Reaching for the cup with her good hand, she winced as she shifted, her injured shoulder jarring. The sling had slipped down, putting pressure on the incision. She hissed through her teeth. "Let me fix that," Luca said, stepping forward. "I can do it," Arya said automatically, pulling away. "Stop being stubborn," Luca said quietly. "Hold still." He moved behind her. Arya froze. He was close. Too close. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. She smelled his cologne, sandalwood and rain. Luca reached over her shoulder, his hands careful and precise. He adjusted the strap at her neck, tightening it so the weight was better distributed. His fingers grazed the bare skin of her neck. Arya's breath hitched. The touch was electric. It was not violent. It was not grabbing. It was gentle. Luca paused. His fingers rested on her skin for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. He looked down at the curve of her neck, the vulnerability of her spine. She was so small. Without the layers of oversized hoodies, she looked delicate, and yet she had thrown this fragile body in front of a gun for him. The air in the kitchen grew thick. Luca felt a sudden, sharp awareness of her. He realized he was standing in her space, his chest inches from her back. He wanted to lean in. He wanted to know if her skin was as soft as it looked. He cleared his throat and stepped back. "Breaking the spell. Better?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. "Yes," Arya said, turning around slowly. She clutched her coffee cup, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Better." She took a sip, needing something to do with her hands. They stood in the kitchen, the city lights twinkling behind them through the glass. "So," Arya said, trying to regain her footing, "what do you actually do?" Luca leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "I told you. I own nightclubs. I manage security firms. I have investments in real estate." Arya raised an eyebrow. "You have a security detail that carries automatic weapons. You have a private doctor who treats gunshot wounds without asking names, and people shoot at you in the street." "That is the price of success in a city like Ravenport," Luca said smoothly. Arya rolled her eyes. "Do not insult my intelligence. You are not a real estate agent. You are mafia." Luca stiffened. He did not like that word. It was a clumsy label for a complex life. "I am a businessman," Luca said, his tone warning. "You are a criminal," Arya corrected, but there was no judgment in her voice. "Just fact. You run things. You hurt people who get in your way. And you think money fixes everything?" Luca laughed, a dry sound, Money fixes most things. Arya, hunger, cold, safety. You of all people should know that. It does not fix everything, Arya said softly, looking at her bandaged shoulder. It does not fix the fact that you are lonely. Luca stopped smiling. He looked at her. Really looked at her. She was standing in his kitchen, wearing his clothes, injured because of him, and she was dissecting his soul with a scalpel. It unnerved him. I am not lonely, Luca lied. I am busy. Arya just looked at him over the rim of her cup. Her eyes said she knew exactly what he was. Meanwhile, across the city, the machinery of Luca's organization was turning. In the back room of the Mirage, Dante slammed a file folder onto the desk. We found the car, Dante said. It was torched in a salvage yard in the Iron District, but the VIN on the chassis survived. And, Luca asked, though he was not in the room, and he was on the phone, pacing the hallway outside Arya's apartment door. It traces back to a shell corporation called Janus Holdings. Dante said, that is one of Victor Hale's fronts. We know that. But here's the kicker. Luca, the purchase order for that car was signed 3 days before the shooting. They knew where you were going to be because they were waiting for you. And the route, Luca asked into the phone. Dante hesitated. The route you took that night? The only people who knew we were exiting through the front were you, me, Marco, and Vico. We changed it at the last minute. Remember? I remember, Luca said, his grip tightening on the phone. It has to be one of us. Luca, Dante said, his voice heavy with dread, or someone so close to us, they might as well be blood. Luca hung up. He stared at the blank screen of his phone. The traitor was inside the house. The walls were closing in. He walked back into the apartment. Arya was still at the table, finishing her coffee. I have to go, Luca said abruptly. Work. Arya looked up, sensing the shift in his mood. The darkness had returned to his eyes. He looked dangerous again. She stood up, walking him to the door. The apartment felt suddenly very big and very empty. Luca, she said, stopping him as he reached for the handle. He turned. Yes, those men, she said, her voice small. The ones who shot at you. Do they know I am here? Will they come back for me? She looked terrified. For all her bravado, she was just a girl who had been shot and was now hiding in a tower. Luca stepped closer to her. He invaded her personal space again, but this time it was protective, not intimidating. He looked down into her brown eyes, seeing the fear she tried to hide. He raised a hand, almost touching her cheek, but stopped himself. He clenched his fist and let it drop to his side. They do not know you are here, Luca said, his voice low and firm. This place is a ghost. It does not exist on paper. But if they find out, they will not, Luca vowed. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. I will burn this city to the ground before I let anyone touch you again. Do you understand me? Arya nodded, her breath catching in her throat. The intensity in his voice was terrifying, but it was also the safest thing she had ever heard. Good, Luca said. Lock the bolt behind me. He walked out into the hallway. Arya watched him go, then closed the heavy door. She turned the deadbolt, the metallic click echoing in the silent apartment. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood of the door. She believed him, and that terrified her more than the bullets. 4 days had passed since Arya had been moved into the fortress in the sky. The apartment was a masterpiece of modern architecture, a glass box suspended hundreds of feet above the grit of Ravenport. It was silent, climate-controlled, and smelled faintly of lemon polish and sterility. To Arya, it felt like a waiting room for the afterlife. She paced the length of the living room, her steps muffled by the thick cream-colored rugs. Her left arm was still bound in the sling, the ache in her shoulder a constant, throbbing reminder of the metal that had torn through her flesh. But the pain was manageable. It was the idleness that was driving her mad. Luca had stocked the place with everything a person could physically need. The refrigerator was full of organic produce, expensive cuts of meat, and imported sparkling water. The bathroom cabinet was lined with high-end skincare products. A massive television hung on the wall, offering thousands of channels. But none of it belonged to her. She felt like a ghost haunting a rich man's life. Every time she drank from a crystal glass, she felt the weight of her debt to him. He was keeping her alive, yes, but he was also keeping her. The distinction felt dangerously thin. To combat the feeling of being a useless object, Arya had started a war against the hired help. When the cleaning service arrived on Tuesday, she had sent them away at the door, insisting she could wipe down a counter herself. When a delivery man arrived with dinner from a 5-star steakhouse on Wednesday, she had refused to eat it, instead clumsily chopping vegetables with one hand to make a simple stir-fry. It was a small rebellion, but it was hers. On Thursday evening, the electronic lock on the front door chirped. Arya was standing at the kitchen island, scrubbing a pot with fierce determination. She did not look up as Luca walked in. "You know I pay people to do that," Luca said, closing the door behind him. "I have one working arm." "Luca, not a broken brain," Arya replied, scrubbing a stubborn spot of grease. "If I sit on that couch for one more hour watching daytime television, I am going to throw myself out the window." Luca paused, taking in the scene. She was wearing one of the oversized sweaters he had provided, the sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back in a messy knot. She looked domestic, yet entirely out of place in his cold, curated world. It was a juxtaposition that made his chest feel tight. "I would prefer you did not defenestrate yourself," Luca said dryly, placing a small paper bag on the counter. "It would be a nightmare for the insurance paperwork." Arya dried her hand on a towel and turned to face him. He looked tired. The lines around his eyes were deeper, and there was a tension in his shoulders that even his tailored suit could not hide. The war with Victor Hale was taking its toll. "What is that?" Arya asked, nodding at the bag. Luca slid it across the marble toward her. "Open it." Arya hesitated. She did not want gifts. Gifts implied a relationship. Gifts implied obligation. But curiosity won out. She reached into the bag and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. It was heavy, the leather soft and smelling of tannins. Beside it was a silver fountain pen. She looked up at him, confused. "What is this?" "I had my people look into your background," Luca said, leaning against the counter and crossing his arms. "Before the streets, before the foster system fell apart." Arya stiffened. "You investigated me. I investigate everyone who enters my orbit. Arya. It is how I stay alive." He gestured to the book. "Your high school English teacher, Mrs. Gable. She's retired now, living in Florida. We tracked her down. She said you were the most talented student she had in 30 years. She said you used to write poetry in the margins of your math homework." Arya felt a flush of heat rise up her neck. It was not anger. It was embarrassment, sharp and sudden. That part of her life felt like a dream from another universe. A universe where she had a future, where she had words instead of hunger. "That was a long time ago," Arya whispered, running her thumb over the embossed leather cover. "Talent does not expire," Luca said quietly. "It just gets buried. You are going crazy in here with nothing to do. I thought you might want to put some of that fire onto paper instead of scrubbing the finish off my cookware." Arya looked at the journal. It was a thoughtful gift. That was what scared her. If he had given her a diamond necklace, she could have dismissed it as a mafia boss buying affection. But this required him to see her. To look past the homeless girl and see the person who had once existed underneath. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. "Do not thank me yet," Luca said, checking his watch. "Go get your shoes." Arya blinked. "Why?" "I have to go to the club to inspect the renovations in the VIP lounge," Luca said, "and the security team is stretched thin tonight running surveillance on Hale's operation. I do not like leaving you here with only one guard in the hallway." He looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "You are coming with me. It is safer if you're in my sight." Arya felt a jolt of nervousness, but it was quickly overtaken by relief. Leaving the apartment meant fresh air. It meant seeing the world again, even if it was just the inside of a nightclub. "Give me 2 minutes," she said, grabbing the journal and heading for the bedroom. The ride to Mirage was silent. The city of Ravenport rolled by outside the tinted windows, a blur of streetlights and shadows. Arya pressed her hand against the cool glass, watching the people on the sidewalks a week ago. She had been one of them. Now, she was gliding past them in a tank wrapped in luxury. When they arrived, the club was closed. The velvet ropes were gone, and the heavy front doors were locked. Luca unlocked them, ushering her inside. It was strange to see Mirage empty. Without the crushing crowds, the thumping bass, and the flashing strobe lights, the space felt cavernous. It smelled of stale alcohol and industrial cleaner. The silence was heavy, broken only by the click of Luca's dress shoes and the squeak of Arya's sneakers on the polished floor. "Stay close," Luca said, his voice echoing slightly. He led her through the main room, checking sight lines, testing locked doors, inspecting the fire exits. He was methodical, a general inspecting his fortress. Arya followed him, clutching her journal against her chest like a shield. They ended up in the center of the dance floor. The DJ booth was dark, looming above them like a pulpit. Luca walked over to a small control panel on the wall. He pressed a few buttons. The main house lights dimmed, replaced by a soft, ambient purple glow that washed over the room. A low, slow beat began to play from the speakers, not the aggressive techno usually associated with Mirage, but a soulful, melancholic jazz track with a heavy saxophone line. "Atmosphere check," Arya asked, raising an eyebrow. "Sound system test," Luca corrected, though there was a hint of a smirk on his lips. He walked back toward her, his movements fluid. He stopped a few feet away. In the dim purple light, the sharp angles of his face were softened. He looked less like a weapon and more like a man. "You know," Arya said, looking around the empty expanse, "it is kind of sad in here without the people. It is just a big, expensive box waiting for noise. It is peaceful," Luca countered. "I prefer it this way. The chaos is for the customers. The silence is for me." Arya tilted her head. "You really are the king of lonely, aren't you? Moretti. You built a castle where no one can touch you, and you stand in the middle of it pretending you enjoy the quiet." Luca let out a low chuckle. "And you are the queen of stubborn. You would rather freeze on a sidewalk than accept a coat, and you would rather scrub dishes with one arm than admit you need help. We are quite a pair." "Maybe," Arya admitted, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Luca looked at her. The music swelled, the saxophone note holding long and mournful. He stepped closer. The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with a sudden, undeniable tension. "Dance with me," Luca said. "It was not a command, it was a question." Arya laughed nervously. "There is no one here. Luca, and I have a bullet hole in my shoulder." "I know," Luca said softly. "I will be careful." He held out his hand. His palm was broad, his fingers long. It was a hand that had dealt violence. She knew that. But it was also the hand that had pressed against her wound to keep her life from spilling out onto the pavement. Arya hesitated. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with fear. She looked at his hand, then up at his eyes. They were waiting. Slowly, she reached out. She placed her uninjured hand in his. His grip was warm and firm. He pulled her gently toward him. He did not pull her into a traditional hold. He was mindful of her sling. He placed his other hand carefully on her waist, his touch light, respectful of her injury. Arya rested her good hand on his shoulder. They began to sway. It was clumsy at first. Arya was stiff, hyper-aware of every point of contact, but Luca led with a surprising grace. He moved them in a slow, small circle, his steps guided by the rhythm of the music. "Relax," Luca murmured, his voice rumbling in his chest. "I have you." Arya let out a breath she had been holding. She let her guard down, just an inch. She allowed herself to lean into him slightly. Her injured shoulder brushed against the lapel of his jacket. The wool was rough against her bare arm, but the heat radiating from him was steady. They moved closer without planning to. It was gravity. It was the magnetism of two people who had seen the worst of the world and found themselves standing in the wreckage together. Arya looked up. Luca was looking down at her. His face was inches away. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark irises. She could see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. "You saved my life," Luca whispered. The words were heavy, laden with a guilt and a gratitude he did not know how to express. "You saved mine first," Arya replied softly, "by bringing me inside. I brought you inside because I caused the danger," Luca said, his brow furrowing. Arya shook her head slightly. "No. You brought me inside because you are not as heartless as you want everyone to think you are. You act like a monster, Luca. But monsters do not give poetry journals to homeless girls." Luca stared at her. Her words cut through his defenses like a knife through silk. She saw him. She saw the parts of him he had buried deep beneath the suits and the violence. His hand on her waist tightened slightly, pulling her flesh against him. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt at his shoulder. The music seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the sound of their breathing. Arya's heart was beating so loud she was sure he could feel it against his chest. His breath was warm on the side of her neck, sending shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Luca leaned in. It was a slow, deliberate movement. He was giving her 1,000 chances to pull away. Arya did not pull away. She tilted her chin up. His lips brushed hers. It was tentative at first, a question asked in the dark, soft, careful. Then, as their lips met fully, a spark ignited. Luca groaned low in his throat. The sound vibrated against her lips. He deepened the kiss, his control fracturing. It was not aggressive, but it was hungry. It was the hunger of a man who had been starving for something real in a world of artificial light. Arya gasped, her hand sliding up his chest, past the knot of his tie, to rest against the pulse point of his throat. His heart was racing, matching hers beat for beat. His thumb moved up to stroke along her jawline, tilting her head back to give him better access. He tasted of coffee and something uniquely him, something dark and intoxicating. The kiss grew more intense, a desperate tangle of breath and emotion. Luca's body pressed against hers, hard and unyielding, but his hand on her injured side remained a protective cage, hovering just over the sling to ensure he did not jostle her wound. It felt dangerous. He was a dangerous man, but in the circle of his arms, where with his lips moving against hers with such reverence, Arya felt a safety she had never known. It was a terrifying paradox. They broke apart, gasping for air, their foreheads rested against each other. Luca's eyes were closed, his lashes dark against his cheekbones. Arya was trembling. "Luca," she breathed, her voice shaky. He opened his eyes. The look in them was raw, naked. There was no boss, no criminal, just a man who had found something precious he was terrified to break. Before he could speak, before he could define the electricity that was crackling between them, the heavy double doors at the front of the club burst open. "Luca," Dante's voice boomed across the empty club, shattering the moment into a million jagged pieces. Luca pulled back instantly, his body snapping into a defensive posture. He placed himself between Arya and the door before he even registered who it was. The transition from lover to protector was instantaneous. "What?" Luca barked, his voice ragged. Dante came running across the dance floor, his face pale and slick with sweat. He stopped, looking between Luca and Arya, sensing the thick tension in the air. But the urgency of his news overrode his hesitation. "We have a problem," Dante said, breathless. "A big one. Speak," Luca commanded, his hand drifting toward the gun holstered beneath his jacket. "My contact at the phone company just came through," Dante said. "There were 3 calls made from a burner phone inside the Mirage 2 nights ago. They pinged off the tower right above us." "Calls to who?" Luca asked, his eyes narrowing. "To a number registered to a shell company in the Cayman Islands," Dante said, "but I traced the IP of the phone that received them. It is sitting in Victor Hale's headquarters." Luca went still. The traitor was definitely one of his lieutenants. "And there is more," Dante continued, glancing nervously at Arya. "We intercepted a text message sent 10 minutes ago. It contained an address." "What address?" Luca demanded. "The address of the St. Jude Medical Center," Dante said, "and a room number. Room 304. Arya gasped. "That was my room." Luca's blood ran cold. The enemy knew she had survived. They knew where she had been treated. And if they knew that, they knew she was a loose end that needed to be cut. Did they hit the clinic? Luca asked, his voice deadly calm. Not yet, Dante said. We have a team en route, but if they were sniffing around the clinic, they might have tracked the transport vehicle. They might know about the apartment. Luca turned away, pacing a tight circle on the dance floor. He ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. The apartment was supposed to be a fortress. Now, it felt like a trap. He looked at Aria. She was standing where he had left her, her lips still swollen from his kiss, her eyes wide with fear. She looked small in the purple light. He had promised to keep her safe. He had brought her into his world to protect her, and instead, he had painted a target on her back. He looked at her mouth, remembering the taste of her, the softness of her surrender. He realized then, with a sickening jolt, that the stakes had shifted. This was no longer just about territory or money laundering or pride. If he lost the club, he could build another one. If he lost money, he could steal more. But if he lost her, the thought made his stomach lurch. He had let her in. He had let her see him. And now, because of that, she was in the crosshairs of a war she had never asked for. "We are leaving," Luca said abruptly, grabbing Aria's good hand. "Where?" Aria asked, stumbling to keep up with his long strides. "Somewhere they cannot find you," Luca said, pulling her toward the back exit. He did not look at Dante. He did not look at the club he had spent 10 years building. He only had eyes for the girl stumbling beside him, the girl who had taken a bullet for a monster and, for some godforsaken reason, had just let him kiss her. "Find Marco," Luca threw over his shoulder at Dante. "Find him and bring him to me. I want to look him in the eye when I ask him who he is working for." They burst out into the alleyway, the cold night air slapping them in the face. The romance of the dance floor was dead. The reality of the street had returned, and it was hungrier than ever. "Get in the car," Luca ordered, opening the door for her. As Aria slid into the seat, she looked up at him. "Luca," she whispered. "I have got you," Luca said, his voice fierce. "I have got you." But as he slammed the door shut, locking her inside the armored shell, Luca Moretti knew that for the first time in his life, he was afraid, because for the first time, he had something to lose that he could not replace. The penthouse apartment had transformed from a sanctuary into a bunker. What had once been a sleek, glass-walled observation deck over the city of Ravenport was now a cage of high-tension anxiety. The windows were fitted with blast-resistant shades that remained drawn, casting the expensive furniture in perpetual twilight. 2 guards stood outside the front door 24 hours a day, and a third, a silent man named Silas who looked like he chewed gravel for breakfast, was stationed inside the living room, watching the monitors of a newly installed security system. Aria Cole felt the walls closing in. She paced the length of the living room, her worn sneakers sinking into the plush carpet. Her injured shoulder was healing, the sling now replaced by a heavy bandage that allowed for some movement, though the ache was a constant companion. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the suffocation of being managed. "Silas," Aria said, stopping in front of the guard, "I need to go downstairs, just to the lobby. I need to walk more than 20 feet in a straight line." Silas did not look up from the tablet he was monitoring. "Mr. Moretti gave strict orders. "Miss Cole, you do not leave this floor. You do not open the blinds. You do not answer the phone. I am not a prisoner," Aria snapped, her patience fraying like an old rope. "I am a guest. There is a difference. For your safety, the difference is irrelevant." Silas droned. The electronic lock on the front door beeped, flashing green. The heavy door swung open and Luca Moretti stepped inside. He brought a gust of cold air and the smell of ozone with him. He looked like a man who had not slept in 3 days. His tie was loosened, his eyes were bloodshot, and he carried the weight of a crumbling empire on his shoulders. Silas stood up immediately. "Boss, room clear?" Luca asked, his voice rough. "Clear," Silas confirmed. "Give us a minute," Luca ordered. Silas nodded and stepped out into the hallway. The door ceiling shut behind him with a vacuum-like thud. Luca turned to Aria. He barely had time to drop his keys on the console table before she started. "I cannot do this." "Luca," Arya said, her voice tight. "I cannot live like a potted plant in a glass box. I need air. I need to see the sky without a filter." Luca walked past her toward the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water. "You're safe here. Arya, that is the priority. Safe." Arya laughed, a harsh sound. "This is not safety. This is solitary confinement with better thread count. You have cut me off from the world. You have taken my phone. You have men watching me sleep. I felt freer when I was sleeping on cardboard." Luca slammed the glass down on the counter. Water sloshed over the rim. He turned to face her, his eyes blazing. "Do you think I enjoy this?" he demanded. "Do you think I want to pay 3 teams of security to babysit you?" "Then let me go," Arya shouted back. "If I am such a burden, open the door. I cannot let you go," Luca roared, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. "Because there are people out there who want to put a bullet in your head just to send me a message." He stopped inches from her, his chest heaving. The anger in the room was thick, suffocating. Arya looked up at him, refusing to back down, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "You are treating me like an asset," Arya said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "Like a shipment of drugs or a stack of cash you are trying to hide. I am a person. Luca, I have choices, and I choose to take my chances outside rather than be suffocated in here. You do not get to choose," Luca snapped. "Not with my enemies hunting you." "Why?" Arya challenged, poking him hard in the chest with her good hand. "Why do you care so much? Is it guilt? Is it because you feel bad that the stray dog got kicked while trying to protect the master?" "No," Luca shouted. He grabbed her hand, the one poking him, and held it tight against his chest, right over his heart. His grip was desperate, shaking. "It is because I have never had anyone jump in front of a weapon for me," he said, his voice cracking, stripping away the veneer of the mafia boss. "Never. Not my father. Not my men. No one. You are the only person in my entire life who thought I was worth dying for." Arya froze, the anger drained out of her, replaced by a sudden, aching silence. She felt the frantic rhythm of his heart beneath her palm. Luca looked down at her, his eyes raw and terrified. "I do not know how to handle the thought of losing you. Arya, I look at that door, and I am terrified that if you walk out of it, I will never see you again. I am not keeping you here to control you. I am keeping you here because I am scared." The admission hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Luca Moretti, the man who frightened half the city, was trembling. Arya softened. Her fingers curled slightly against his shirt. "You could have just said that," she whispered. "I am not used to saying things like that," Luca muttered, releasing her hand and stepping back, running a hand over his face. "I am used to giving orders." "We are going to have to work on that," Arya said gently. Luca let out a long, ragged sigh. "I need to shower. I have a meeting with the inner circle in an hour. We're going to flush out the rat." He walked toward the bedroom, his shoulders slumped. Arya watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of frustration and tenderness. He was a monster. Yes, but he was a monster who was trying to learn how to be human. An hour later, Arya was in the kitchen making tea when she heard voices in the hallway. The soundproofing was excellent, but the vent near the entryway carried sound if people were speaking loudly enough. She moved closer to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. "It is a stupid risk." Marco's voice drifted through, sharp and agitated. "We should not be moving product right now. We should be hunkering down. We cannot stop operations just because Victor is rattling his cage." Dante's deep voice replied, "Luca wants to send a message that we are still open for business. It is reckless," Marco insisted, "just like that night at the club. I told him we should have taken the back exit. I told him the front was too exposed. If he had listened to me about the route, none of this would have happened." Arya went still. She remembered the conversation she had with Luca in the clinic. He had mentioned that the route had been changed at the last minute. Marco was claiming he had argued for the back exit, but Arya distinctly remembered hearing Dante say, days ago, that Marco had been the one coordinating the arrival times for the front entrance. Loose ends. Dante, Marco continued, his voice dropping lower. That girl is a loose end. Keeping her alive is just inviting more trouble. Aria stepped back from the door, her blood running cold. Marco referred to her as a loose end, not as a victim, not as a witness, as a problem to be solved. The front door opened a moment later. Luca emerged from the bedroom, freshly showered and dressed in a dark suit, armor for the coming battle. Aria, he said, adjusting his cuffs. I have to go. Wait, Aria said, stepping into his path. She grabbed his arm, pulling him away from the door where the guards might hear. What is it? Luca asked, seeing the pale look on her face. I heard them, Aria whispered. Dante and Marco. They were arguing in the hall. Luca frowned. They argue all the time. They are brothers in arms, but they are different men. Marco said something, Aria said urgently. He said he told you to take the back exit the night of the shooting. He said he warned you the front was too exposed. Luca went still. His eyes narrowed. Marco insisted on the front entrance that night. He said it was important for the public to see me entering Mirage without fear. He planned the arrival. That is not what he just told Dante, Aria said. He's rewriting history. Luca. And he called me a loose end. He sounds desperate. Luca looked at the door, his jaw tightening until a muscle feathered in his cheek. He did not want to believe it. Marco had been with him since they were teenagers, running cigarettes on the docks. Marco had eaten at his mother's table, but the pieces were fitting together. The specific knowledge of the route, the panic, the insistence that Aria was a liability. Thank you, Luca said, his voice deadly quiet. You believe me? Aria asked. I believe you have good instincts, Luca said, and I believe Marco is scared. A scared man makes mistakes. He kissed her on the forehead, a quick, distracted press of lips, and left. Aria touched the spot where he had kissed her, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. That night, Luca returned late. The apartment was dark, save for the city lights bleeding through the edges of the blinds. Aria was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed in the guest room, unable to sleep. The door creaked open. Luca stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the hall light. He did not turn on the overheads. He walked in and sat heavily on the edge of the bed beside her. He did not say a word. He just sat there, head bowed, hands clasped between his knees. He radiated exhaustion. It was a bone-deep weariness that seemed to pull him down toward the earth. Aria shifted, turning to face him. Rough night, she asked softly. Every night is a rough night lately, Luca murmured. He turned his head to look at her. In the shadows, his eyes were dark pools. He reached out and took her hand, her good hand, and held it. His skin was cold. Aria looked down at his hand. His knuckles were scarred, the skin thickened and white from years of impact. She ran her thumb over a jagged line on his index finger. How many of these are from hurting people? She asked quietly. Most of them, Luca admitted, his voice a low rumble. And how many from protecting people? Luca paused. Not enough. He turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. His grip was tight, bordering on painful, as if he were holding on to a lifeline. My father was a violent man, Luca said suddenly. He did not look at her. He looked at their joined hands. He taught me that the world is a hammer, and you are either the nail or the hand that swings it. He used to break my fingers when I hesitated to strike back. He said mercy was a disease. Aria's heart ached. She squeezed his hand. He was wrong, was he? Luca asked, looking at her with a desperate intensity. Look at us. Aria, look at you. You showed mercy. You tried to save me. And look what it got you. A bullet in the shoulder and a prison cell in the sky. Maybe he was right. Maybe caring gets you killed. No, Aria whispered. She reached up with her other hand, ignoring the twinge of pain in her shoulder, and cupped his face. Her palm was warm against his cool skin. Caring is the only thing that makes us different from the animals. It is the only thing that makes surviving worth it. Luca leaned into her touch. He closed his eyes, exhaling a shaky breath. He looked so young in that moment, stripped of his power and his violence. I am so tired, Aria, he whispered. I am so tired of the war. Then rest, she said. Just for a minute. Be here, with me. Luca opened his eyes. He searched her face, looking for judgment, looking for fear. He found neither. He found only a quiet strength that humbled him. He shifted, turning his body fully toward her. He moved carefully, mindful of her injury. He brought his hand up to her face, his thumb brushing the delicate skin under her eye. "You are beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just your face. The way you fight, the way you see me." Aria's breath hitched. She felt a magnetic pull, an undeniable gravity drawing them together. "Kiss me," she whispered. Luca did not hesitate. He leaned in, capturing her lips. This kiss was different from the one in the club. That had been tentative, an exploration. This was desperate. It was a collision of two souls seeking shelter in each other. It was deep and consuming, tasting of fear and longing. Luca groaned, a low sound of need vibrating in his chest. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her uninjured side, pulling her flush against him. Aria clung to him, her fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck. They fell back onto the bed, side by side, bodies aligned. Luca was incredibly careful, his arm forming a protective barrier around her injured shoulder, taking his weight on his elbow so he would not crush her. The room faded away, the danger outside, the betrayals, the guns, it all dissolved. There was only the heat of his skin, the rough texture of his jaw against her cheek, the frantic rhythm of their breathing. Luca kissed her jaw, her throat, the hollow of her collarbone. His touch was reverent, almost worshipful. He held her as if she were made of glass, precious and fragile. "Stay with me," he murmured against her skin. "Just stay with me." "I am not going anywhere," Aria promised, her voice breathless. They lay there for a long time, tangled together, trading kisses and whispers in the dark. It was a declaration of allegiance, in a world tearing itself apart. They had chosen each other. The next morning, the softness was gone. Luca stood in front of the mirror, tying his tie with military precision. The armor was back in place. Aria sat up in bed, pulling the sheet around her. "Be careful," she said. Luca turned to her. His eyes were cold again, focused on the mission. But when he looked at her, they softened slightly. "Today we end it," Luca said. He left the apartment and drove straight to the warehouse district. He called a meeting. Dante, Marco, Vico, and 2 trusted captains were there. "We are moving the cash reserves," Luca announced, slamming a map onto the table. "Tonight, 10 o'clock. Marco looked up, surprised. "I thought we were locking down." "We were," Luca said, looking Marco dead in the eye. "But I have received intel that Victor knows where the reserves are held. We need to move them to the vault in the west side before he strikes." He pointed to a route on the map. "We take the river road. 2 armored trucks, Vico. You drive lead. Marco. You take the rear guard." Marco studied the map, his eyes darting back and forth. "River Road is isolated. Luca, it is a choke point." "It is the fastest way," Luca said firmly. "And nobody knows about it but the people in this room. If Victor hits us there, we will know exactly how he found out." "Also," Luca added, his voice casual, "I am moving the girl tonight." Marco's head snapped up. "Moving her where?" "To a safe house in the country." Luca lied smoothly. "The apartment is compromised. She leaves at 11. Marco nodded, licking his lips nervously. "Good. That is smart." The meeting broke. Luca watched Marco leave the room. He saw the way Marco pulled his phone from his pocket the second he was out the door. The trap was set. That night, at 10 o'clock, 2 armored trucks rolled down River Road. They were heavy, imposing vehicles, but inside, there was no cash. There were heavily armed men from a mercenary group Luca had hired privately, unbeknownst to his own lieutenants. Luca sat in his office at the Mirage, staring at a bank of monitors. Dante stood beside him. "Do you really think he will do it?" Dante asked. "Wait," Luca said. At 10:15, the feed from the lead truck went chaotic. An explosion rocked the camera. Flashes of gunfire lit up the screen. Vehicles swarmed the road, blocking the trucks. "It is a hit." Dante swore. Victor's men, they hit the exact spot, Luca said, his voice devoid of emotion. The exact time. He pulled out his phone. Get Marco on the line. Dante dialed Marco's number. It rang and rang and rang. He's not picking up, Dante said. Track him, Luca ordered. Dante typed furiously on a laptop. His GPS is... It is moving. Fast. He's heading toward the interstate. He's running. Luca closed his eyes. The betrayal was confirmed. The brother he had grown up with, the man who had stood at his side for a decade, had sold him out. And worse, he had tried to sell Aria out. Let him run, Luca said coldly. He cannot hide from me. Not forever. Suddenly, Luca's personal phone vibrated on the desk. It was a single text message. Unknown number. Luca picked it up. He opened the message. The blood drained from his face. It was a photo. It was taken from a distance, likely from a rooftop across the street from the high-rise apartment. It showed a window. The blinds were cracked open just an inch, likely when Aria had been pacing earlier that day. Through the gap, Aria was visible. She was standing in the living room looking out. The crosshairs of a digital overlay were superimposed over her face. Beneath the photo was a simple caption, "Nice view. She looks fragile." Luca dropped the phone as if it were burning. The trap had worked to expose Marco, but the cost was catastrophic. Victor Hale knew exactly where Aria was. The fortress was breached. Dante picked up the phone and looked at the image. He paled. "Luca," Dante said, his voice shaking. "Get the car," Luca whispered, a sound of pure terror. He grabbed his gun from the desk, racking the slide. "We have to get to her. Now." He sprinted for the door. The image of the crosshairs over Aria's face burned into his retinas. He had played a game of chess with the devil, and while he was taking a pawn, the devil had moved to take his queen. The drive to the penthouse was a blur of motion and terror. Luca pushed the armored SUV to its limit, the engine roaring as he wove through the late-night traffic of Ravenport. Dante gripped the passenger handle, his knuckles white, radioing ahead to the security team at the building. There was no answer. Silence on the comms was worse than screaming. It meant control had been lost. Luca slammed the car into park at the curb before the wheels had fully stopped spinning. He was out of the door instantly, his gun drawn, moving with a lethal grace that terrified the few pedestrians on the street. "Stay close," Luca ordered. They breached the lobby. The scene was not a massacre, but it was a clear message. The two guards at the front desk were zip-tied and unconscious behind the marble counter, lumps rising on their heads. They had been taken out quickly, professionally. This was not a brawl, it was an extraction. Luca sprinted to the elevator, overriding the security codes with shaking hands. The ride up to the penthouse took 40 seconds. It felt like 40 years. Every heartbeat was a drum pounding against his ribs, echoing the same word over and over. Aria, Aria, Aria. The elevator doors slid open. The front door to the apartment was ajar. The lock had been drilled. Luca entered, weapon raised, clearing the room in a sweep. "Clear," he shouted. Though his voice cracked, the apartment was silent. The lamp in the living room was knocked over. The bulb shattered. A vase lay in pieces near the hallway. But there was no body. No Aria. Luca holstered his gun and walked to the center of the room. Lying on the plush cream rug was the leather journal he had given her. It was open, the pages crumpled as if someone had stepped on it in a struggle. He knelt down beside the journal. On the brass handle of the bedroom door was a smear of bright red blood. It was fresh. Luca touched it, the tacky substance staining his fingertip. A sound tore from his throat. A roar of pure, animalistic rage that shook the walls. He stood up, kicking the coffee table over, sending glass flying. "They took her," he snarled. "They came into my home and they took her." His phone rang. The sound cut through the chaos like a knife. It was a restricted number. Luca snatched it from his pocket, pressing it to his ear. He did not speak. He just listened. "Hello?" "Luca." Victor Hale's voice purred on the other end. It was smug, oily, and triumphant. "If you touch her," Luca whispered, his voice vibrating with a deadly frequency, "I will peel the skin from your bones." Victor laughed. "Such passion. I told Marco you had gone soft. I told him you cared about the stray." He did not want to believe me. Let me talk to her, Luca demanded. A moment of shuffling, then a muffled cry. Luca! Arya, Luca breathed, closing his eyes. Are you okay? I am. Arya's voice was cut off by a sharp sound of a strike and a gasp of pain. That is enough, Victor said, coming back on the line. She is alive, for now, but she is bleeding. Luca, that shoulder of hers looks nasty. It would be a shame if she got an infection or a second hole. Where? Luca said. The old cannery at the docks. Victor said, Warehouse 4. Come alone. No backup. No cavalry. If I see one other car, one police light, one shadow that does not belong to you, she dies before you even park. I will be there in 20 minutes, Luca said, alone. Victor repeated. Bring the deeds to the club. Bring the transfer papers for the accounts. You know what I want. You bring me your empire, and I give you the girl. The line went dead. Luca lowered the phone. He looked at Dante. Warehouse 4, Luca said. I am coming with you, Dante said immediately, checking the magazine of his weapon. No, Luca said. He said alone. It is a trap. Luca, Dante shouted, grabbing Luca's shoulder. You know it is a trap. You walk in there alone, and they kill you both. You cannot trade your life for hers. I can, Luca said, looking Dante in the eye, and I will. He pulled away, walking toward the door, but he paused at the threshold. Give me 10 minutes, Luca said quietly. Not turning around. I will drive in alone. I will draw their attention. You take the team and circle the perimeter. Come in from the water side. Do not breach until you hear shots. Dante stared at his friend's back. He saw the tension in Luca's shoulders, the terrifying resolve. He nodded, even though Luca could not see it. 10 minutes, Dante confirmed. Do not get dead before then, boss. The drive to the docks was a funeral procession of one. The rain had started again, turning the world into a blur of gray and black. Luca's mind was cold, sharp. He was not thinking about the club. He was not thinking about the money he was about to lose. He was thinking about the blood on the doorknob. He pulled up to the rusted gates of the cannery. The warehouse loomed ahead, a skeleton of corrugated metal and broken glass. He parked the car in the open, under the single working floodlight, showing his hands as he stepped out. He held a briefcase in his left hand. Inside were the papers Victor wanted. He walked toward the gaping maw of the warehouse doors. Inside, the smell hit him. Salt water, rotting wood, and old oil. The space was vast and shadowed, lit by hanging construction lights that cast long, distorted shapes on the concrete floor. In the center of the room, illuminated by a harsh spotlight, was a chair. Arya was tied to it. Her wrists were bound behind her back with zip ties. Her mouth was taped shut, though her eyes were wide and frantic. Her heavy bandage had been torn, and blood was seeping through her shirt again, dark and wet. Standing to her left was Marco. He looked pale, sweating profusely, his gun held loosely in his hand. He would not meet Luca's eyes. Standing to her right was Victor Hale. He was a small man with a Napoleonic complex and a cruel smile. He held a pistol pointed directly at Arya's temple. "Welcome to the party," Victor called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Luca stopped 20 feet away. He dropped the briefcase on the floor. "Let her go," Luca said. Victor tutted, shaking his head. "Not so fast. Kick the gun over here." Luca slowly reached into his jacket. He pulled out his handgun with 2 fingers, holding it by the barrel. He bent down and placed it on the floor, then kicked it, sliding across the concrete until it stopped at Marco's feet. Marco stared at the gun. "Pick it up!" "Marco!" Victor barked. Marco scrambled to pick up the weapon, tucking it into his belt. Luca looked at his former lieutenant. "Why?" "Marco." Marco flinched. "You were losing it. Luca, you were obsessed with her. You were making us weak." "Victor offered me a way out, a guarantee, Luca repeated, his voice filled with contempt. "You think a snake like him honors guarantees? Once I am dead, you are next." "Enough," Victor interrupted, pressing the barrel of his gun harder against Arya's head. Arya whimpered behind the tape, her eyes pleading with Luca to run, to leave. Victor smirked. "Look at her. A homeless stray, a beggar. You built an empire of blood and fear. Luca, and you are throwing it all away for a girl who digs through trash cans. It is pathetic. What is she to you, a pet? A charity case? Luca looked at Arya. He saw the bruises on her face. He saw the terror in her eyes. And beneath the terror, he saw the same fire that had made her yell at him on the sidewalk. She is not a pet, Luca said, his voice ringing clear and loud in the silence. She is the only thing in this room that is real. Victor laughed. You're in love with her. The great Luca Moretti, brought to his knees by a street rat. Yes, Luca said. The word hung in the air. Marco looked up, shocked. Arya went still. I care about her more than the money. Luca continued, taking a slow step forward. More than the club, more than this warehouse, more than my own life. You want the empire? Victor, take it. It is just brick and mortar. But if you hurt her again, I will burn you alive. Victor's smile faltered. The raw honesty in Luca's voice was unsettling. It was not the bargaining of a businessman, it was the vow of a fanatic. Victor reached forward and ripped the tape off Arya's mouth. Tell him goodbye, sweetheart, Victor sneered. Arya gasped for air, coughing. She looked at Luca, tears streaming down her face mixed with grime. Do not do it, she sobbed. Luca, do not give him everything. I am not worth it. I never wanted you to die for me. You did not give me a choice when you took that bullet, Luca said gently. Now I am returning the favor. He looked at Victor. The papers are in the briefcase. Signed and notarized. Mirage is yours. The routes are yours. Just let her walk away. Victor looked at the briefcase. Greed flashed in his eyes. Marco, check the papers. Victor ordered. Marco hesitated, then stepped toward the briefcase. Victor kept his gun trained on Arya, but his eyes flickered toward the prize on the floor. He stepped slightly away from the chair, wanting to see the documents that would make him the king of Ravenport. It was a mistake. As Victor leaned forward, distracted by his own victory, Arya saw her opening. She did not have weapons, she did not have hands, but she had leverage. She threw her weight backward, rocking the chair onto its rear legs, and then violently jerked her body forward. The heavy wooden chair slammed down, but she used the momentum to thrust herself sideways. She crashed into Victor's knees. It was not a graceful move. It was a desperate, blunt force collision. Her injured shoulder took the impact, screaming in agony, but the wooden leg of the chair caught Victor squarely in the shin. Victor yelled. Stumbling backward, his balance shattered, his gun fired wild, the bullet striking the ceiling. Luca did not hesitate. The moment Arya moved, he was already in motion. He lunged, not for Victor, but for Marco. Marco, stunned by the sudden chaos, fumbled for his weapon. Luca hit him like a freight train. He drove his shoulder into Marco's chest, sending them both crashing to the concrete. Luca's fist connected with Marco's jaw, a brutal, punishing blow. He ripped the gun from Marco's waistband. Victor recovered his balance, swinging his weapon toward Luca. Luca rolled onto his back and fired. Bang, bang. Victor screamed, dropping his gun as a bullet tore through his forearm. At that exact second, the skylights above shattered. Ropes dropped from the ceiling, and the side doors exploded inward. Federal agents? No. It was Dante. Dante's tactical team poured into the warehouse, weapons raised. Drop it, Dante roared. Victor's guards, who had been lurking in the shadows, realized the tide had turned. They threw down their weapons, raising their hands. The warehouse fell into a tense standoff. Victor was clutching his bleeding arm, cursing. Marco was on the ground, dazed, but Marco was not done. In his panic, seeing his gamble fail, he reached for a backup piece, a small ankle holster he had concealed. He pulled the small revolver, his eyes wild. He did not aim at the tactical team. He aimed at Victor, the man who had promised him safety and led him to ruin. He's going to kill me, Marco screamed, terrified that Victor would testify against him. Luca saw the movement. He stepped on Marco's wrist, hearing the bone crunch. Marco shrieked and dropped the gun. Luca stood over him. The rage that had been building for days, the fear of losing Arya, the betrayal of a brother, it all focused into a single point. He aimed his gun at the center of Marco's forehead. Luca, no! The scream tore through the red haze in Luca's mind. He froze. His finger was tightening on the trigger. Arya was still tied to the overturned chair, lying on her side on the cold concrete. She craned her neck to look at him. Don't. Arya pleaded, her voice hoarse. "Do not kill him. Not like this. You are not a murderer. Luca, not anymore. Do not let him turn you back into one." Luca looked down at Marco. Marco was sobbing, broken, pathetic. He was not a threat. He was just a coward. If Luca pulled the trigger, he was just a gangster cleaning up a mess. If he walked away, he was something else. Luca exhaled a long, shuddering breath. He shifted his aim and pistol-whipped Marco across the temple. Marco slumped into unconsciousness. "It is over," Luca said, his voice flat. "Dante, tie him up." "The police can have him. We have enough evidence on his phone to put him away for life." Luca holstered his gun and turned. He ran to Arya, dropping to his knees. He pulled a knife from his boot and sliced through the zip ties binding her wrists. "Arya," he gasped, pulling the tape and ropes away. As soon as she was free, she collapsed into him. Her arms, weak and trembling, wrapped around his neck. Luca pulled her into his lap, burying his face in her hair. He held her tightly, rocking her slightly back and forth. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving him shaking. "I thought I lost you," he whispered into her ear. "I thought I was too late. You came." Arya wept, clutching his jacket. "You came for me, always," Luca vowed. "Always outside." The sound of sirens began to wail. Getting closer, the police were coming to clean up the remains of the war. Luca pulled back to look at her face. He wiped a smudge of dirt from her cheek with his thumb. "I am done." "Arya," he said, his voice serious. "Done with what? With this? With the life? With the blood? I cannot do it anymore. Not if it means putting you in a chair like that. I want out." Arya searched his eyes. She saw the truth there. The monster in the suit was gone. The man remained. "Okay," she whispered, leaning her forehead against his. "Then let us get out." 6 weeks later, the boardroom was bright, lit by natural sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a stark contrast to the dark back rooms Luca was used to. Luca sat at the head of the table. He wore a navy suit, but no tie. He looked relaxed. "So, the acquisition is complete," the lawyer said, sliding a stack of papers across the table. "The shell companies have been dissolved. The illicit assets have been liquidated and donated to the City Rehabilitation Fund as part of the plea deal for your cooperation against Victor Hale and Mirage," Luca asked. "Mirage is now fully legitimate," the lawyer confirmed. "Under the new management structure, with you as a silent partner and consultant, the authorities are satisfied. Mr. Moretti, you are officially a retired man." Luca signed the last paper. He capped his pen and stood up. Dante was waiting by the door. He was not wearing a holster for the first time in 15 years. "How does it feel to be a civilian?" Dante asked, grinning. Luca adjusted his jacket. "It feels quiet. I like it." He walked out of the building, not into a waiting armored car, but into a standard sedan. He drove himself. He drove to a quiet street in a renovated neighborhood near the park. He parked and walked up the steps of a brownstone building. He unlocked the door. "Honey, I am home," he called out, the words feeling strange and wonderful on his tongue. Arya walked out of the kitchen. She looked different. The hollow cheeks were filled out. Her hair was shiny and loose. She wore a simple sweater and jeans. But they fit her perfectly. She was holding a watering can. "Hey," she said, smiling. Her arm was out of the sling, though she still moved it carefully. "How was the shelter?" Luca asked, kissing her cheek. "Busy," Arya said, walking back to water a fern by the window. "We had 3 new kids come in today, runaways. I got them beds and hot meals. It felt good." "Luca, to be on the other side of the counter, I bet," Luca said, watching her. The apartment was warm. It was filled with books stacked on the floor, plants Arya had rescued, and photos on the mantel. In the bathroom, 2 toothbrushes sat in a cup. On the nightstand, his watch lay next to her hair tie. It was a life built on small, shared things. That evening, they sat on the couch. The TV was on low, but neither was watching. Arya was curled up with her legs over Luca's lap. He was absent-mindedly rubbing her ankle. "You know," Arya said, looking at him, "you are getting soft. Moretti, I saw you smiling at the neighbor's dog this morning." "I was baring my teeth," Luca deadpanned. It was a threat display. Arya laughed, nudging him with her foot. "Liar. You love that dog. Just like you love this boring, safe life. I do, Luca admitted. He reached out and pulled her closer, dragging her until she was straddling his lap. He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his forehead against hers. Who saved who? Arya, he whispered. You took the bullet, but I think you are the one who saved me. Arya ran her fingers through his hair. Let us call it even. She leaned down and kissed him. It was soft at first, sweet and familiar. Then it deepened. Luca's hands tightened on her waist, pulling her flush against him. The kiss grew heated, carrying the memory of the warehouse, the fear of loss, and the overwhelming gratitude of survival. It was a kiss that tasted of a future they had fought for with blood and bone. They broke apart, breathless. Luca rested his hand on her cheek, looking at her with total devotion. Come on, he said. Let us look at the city. They walked out onto the small balcony. The night air was crisp, but not cold. Below them, Ravenport twinkled, a sea of lights. Arya leaned against the railing, looking down at the street below. It looked so far away now. I finally got off the sidewalk, she murmured, half joking. Luca slipped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her into his warmth. Best thing my club ever did, he said softly, was having you sit outside it. Arya smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. Together, they turned their backs on the city, on the old world of bullets and begging, and walked back inside, closing the door on the night to live in the light they had built together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey from the cold streets of Ravenport to a warm new beginning for Luca and Arya. I hope you enjoyed the ride. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below and tell me where in the world you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this series, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories and hit the like button so you never miss an episode. Share your thoughts in English in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time, stay safe and keep believing in love.